I named this story The Rise of the Dragon Clan. In the aftermath of the Vietnam War, many Hmong families fled Southeast Asia, seeking refuge in the United States. Displaced and disoriented, they were thrust into a world that didn't understand them, and often didn't care to. In places like St. Paul, Minnesota, one of the largest Hmong communities in America, the clash of cultures was stark and unforgiving. In the 1980s, Hmong kids like Long faced constant hostility. The schools they attended had never seen Hmong students before, and the other kids, Mexican, white, and black, didn't know what to make of them. Ignorance quickly turned to hatred. Long and the other Hmong kids were bullied relentlessly, singled out for the way they spoke, the clothes they wore, and the culture they represented. At school, they were outnumbered. The bullying wasn't just verbal. Fights broke out regularly, with Hmong kids being beaten and humiliated in front of everyone. They would come home crying, sometimes begging their parents not to send them back. It was hard for the parents to understand. They had fled a war zone, believing America would give their children a better life. But instead of safety, their kids were fighting a different war. Some of the Hmong kids, desperate to escape the daily torment, began skipping school. They'd lie to their parents, pretending to attend, but instead, they would meet up with other Hmong kids, hiding out at parks or abandoned lots. They'd roam the streets during school hours and return home at the same time school let out, fooling their parents into thinking everything was fine. Among those kids was Long. He hated the feeling of powerlessness that came from being the target of constant bullying. The school system didn't care, and the police saw the Hmong as just another minority group they didn't want to deal with. Long realized that they had no one looking out for them except each other. It was after one brutal incident, when Long's younger brother was beaten by a group of local gang members, that something inside him snapped. He'd had enough. The adults weren't going to protect them, so Long decided it was time for the Hmong youth to protect themselves. He gathered a small group of friends, and together, they made a vow. No more fear, no more running. At first, Long's crew was focused on defending themselves. They fought back when bullied, and soon, word spread. Other Hmong kids began to look to them for protection. But as the group grew, their focus shifted. They weren't just a group of kids anymore. They were becoming something more organized, something with rules and hierarchy. They began calling themselves the Dragon Clan, a name that evoked their ancestral past as warriors in the highlands of Laos. The Dragon Clan took on a life of its own. Long, now known by the street name The Devil, led the group with a mixture of fierce loyalty and strategic violence. They fought off rival gangs, not just for survival, but for dominance. The streets of St. Paul became their territory, and they enforced their control through fear. The other gangs, Mexican, black, white, began to respect them, or at least stay out of their way. For the Hmong youth who felt powerless for so long, the Dragon Clan became a source of pride and strength. The Hmong community saw him as a protector, a young man who had turned the tables on the bullies who had once terrorized them. However, as the Dragon Clan's influence expanded, something darker took root. Other Hmong youth, inspired by Long's success, wanted to do more than follow him. They wanted to surpass him. Soon, other gangs started forming, each determined to prove they were better and stronger than Long's Dragon Clan. These new gangs saw Long not as a hero, but as a rival. Tensions began to rise within the Hmong community. At first, the fighting between these rival gangs was small, but it quickly spiraled out of control. They clashed at major Hmong gatherings, the Hmong New Year, the annual Hmong July 4th celebration, and during Hmong sports tournaments. What had once been a time of unity and cultural pride became a battlefield as gangs fought for dominance, not protection. The violence was brutal and public. Once peaceful events were now scarred by fights, stabbings, and even shootings. The very community that Long had once vowed to protect was now caught in the crossfire of a war between Hmong gangs. The original purpose of the Dragon Clan to stand up against those who bullied and oppressed their people was lost. Instead, the Hmong youth were turning on each other, fighting for power and control. Long watched with a heavy heart as the new generation of gang members took what he had built and twisted it into something dangerous. The streets of St. Paul were no longer just a place of survival. They had become a battleground where Mong fought Mong. The sense of pride and unity that had once driven Long now felt hollow. He realized that the power they had fought so hard to gain had only fractured their community further. For Long, the breaking point came when one of his closest friends, Tu, was killed in a gang fight. Tu had been with him from the beginning, one of the kids who had skipped school and stood by Long's side when no one else would. His death was a painful reminder that the violence wasn't just about turf or respect. It was about the lives being lost in the process. The once mighty Dragon Clan, now fractured and contested by newer, more ruthless gangs, had lost its way. What had started as a fight for survival and dignity had become a cycle of violence and destruction. Long's legacy was forever tied to the rise of Hmong gangs. But deep down, he wondered if he had unleashed something he could never control. In the years that followed, Long's story became legend within the Hmong community. Some still saw him as the boy who had stood up when no one else would, a protector of his people. Others saw him as the man who had brought gang violence into their community. But one thing was certain: the rise of the Dragon Clan had changed everything, for better or worse. Thank you for listening to my story. If you like to hear more of my stories, please press the subscribe and like buttons to support me to keep making more videos for you guys. Thank you.